Private Kim Daisu wiped the sweat from his forehead as he pressed his back against the broken wall. 3 days ago, he had been helping his father in their small rice shop in Seoul. Now he held a rifle that felt too heavy in his 19-year-old hands. The sounds of war filled the air around him, the boom of distant cannons, the crack of gunfire, and the rumble of enemy tanks getting closer to the city center. The market where his mother used to buy vegetables every morning was now nothing but piles of brick and twisted metal. Smoke rose from burning buildings all around him. Kim could taste the ash in his mouth and feel it burning his eyes. He had never imagined war would smell like this, like burning wood, gasoline, and something else he did not want to think about. "Kim, get over here," Sergeant Park Minji called to him from behind an overturned truck. She was only 25 years old, but had been in the army for 3 years. Kim had heard the other soldiers say she was one of the smartest radio operators in their unit. Her uniform was torn and dirty, and her long black hair was tied back with a piece of cloth she had torn from her sleeve. Kim ran across the street, staying low as bullets whistled over his head. When he reached Sergeant Park, she was talking rapidly into her radio. Her voice was calm, but Kim could see worry in her dark eyes. "Command says we have to fall back to the Han River," she told him. "The North Korean tanks are too strong. We cannot stop them here." Kim nodded, but his stomach felt sick. Falling back meant leaving Seoul. It meant leaving his neighborhood, his school, the small temple where his grandmother prayed every morning. It meant the enemy would take over his home. Around them, other soldiers were gathering their equipment and preparing to retreat. Some of them were very young, like Kim. Others were older men who had fought in World War II. All of them looked tired and scared, though they tried to hide it. As they prepared to leave, Kim heard new sounds. Not the sounds of war, but the sounds of people. Hundreds of people were walking down the main street, carrying bags and boxes and pulling carts. These were the civilians of Seoul, trying to escape before the North Korean army arrived. Kim saw an old man pushing a wooden cart with a small girl sitting on top of the bundles. The girl could not have been more than 5 years old. She was crying softly, calling for her mother. Behind them walked a young woman carrying a baby on her back and holding the hand of a boy about Kim's age. The boy kept looking back toward the north, toward the sounds of the approaching tanks. "My son is still back there," Kim heard one old woman say to another. "He was supposed to meet us at the market, but now—" She did not finish her sentence. She just kept walking, tears running down her cheeks. A family stopped near where Kim and Sergeant Park were hiding. The father was carrying 2 large bags and trying to keep his 3 children close to him. The mother held their youngest child, a baby who was crying loudly. The father looked around nervously, as if he did not know which way to go. "The bridge," Sergeant Park called to them. "Go to the Han River Bridge. The army will protect the crossing." The father nodded gratefully and hurried his family along. But Kim wondered how long the army could protect anything. They were running, away just like everyone else. More families passed by. Kim saw teachers from his old school leading groups of students. He saw shopkeepers carrying whatever they could save from their stores. He saw a young mother carrying 2 babies, 1 in each arm, walking beside an old man who could barely move his feet. "We have to go," Sergeant Park said, putting her radio in her pack. "The tanks will be here soon." As they started to leave, Kim took one last look at the market where he used to play as a child. Now it was just broken stones and twisted metal. He thought about his family. His parents had left Seoul 2 days ago, but he did not know where they were now. He hoped they were safe. He hoped he would see them again. The sound of tank engines grew louder. Kim could feel the ground shaking under his feet. Somewhere in the distance, he heard the whistle of artillery shells coming down. The enemy was getting very close. Kim and Sergeant Park joined the long line of soldiers and civilians moving south toward the river. Everyone was walking fast, but nobody was running. There was a strange calm in the crowd, as if everyone understood that this was not just a retreat. This was the moment when their old life ended and something new and uncertain began. Behind them, Seoul burned. Ahead of them lay the unknown. Kim gripped his rifle tighter and kept walking 1 step at a time toward whatever was waiting for them at the Han River. Lieutenant Lee Sunwoo lay flat on his belly on the rocky ground, looking through his binoculars at the enemy positions on the hills across the valley. The sun was just coming up, painting the sky orange and pink, but Lee was not thinking about how beautiful it looked. He was counting the enemy soldiers he could see moving between the trees. For 6 weeks now, his unit had been fighting here, in the mountains near Busan. This was the last piece of South Korea that was still free. Everything else, Seoul, Incheon, Daegu, all the big cities, had fallen to the North Korean army. If they lost this battle, there would be nowhere left to go except into the sea. Lee wiped the sweat from his face. Even though it was early morning, and the air was cool, he was sweating from fear and exhaustion. He had not slept more than 2 hours at a time in weeks. Every night the North Koreans attacked. Every day his men died. "Lieutenant," whispered Corporal Choi Min-soo as he crawled up the hill to where Lee was hiding. Choi was only 22 years old, but the fighting had made him look much older. His uniform was torn and dirty, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "The Americans are here. They want to know where to set up their guns." Lee nodded, but did not take his eyes away from the binoculars. He had heard the American trucks arriving during the night. The 24th Infantry Regiment had finally made it to their position. Lee was glad for the help, but he wondered if it would be enough. The North Koreans had so many soldiers, and they kept coming no matter how many were killed. "Tell them to put their heavy guns on the ridge behind us," Lee said quietly, "and ask them if they have any medical supplies. We have many wounded men." Choi nodded and started to crawl back down the hill. But then he stopped and looked back at Lee. "Sir, do you think we can hold this position?" Lee was quiet for a long moment. He thought about all the men he had lost in the past weeks. Good men, brave men. Men like Private Kim Dae-soo, who had died just 5 days ago near Daegu. Kim had been so young, only 19. He had been writing a letter to his mother when the North Korean artillery started falling. Lee had found the letter in Kim's pocket after the battle. It was covered with blood, but Lee could still read some of the words. "Dear Mother, I hope you are safe. I miss you very much. I hope I can come home soon." Lee had tried to send the letter to Kim's family, but he did not know if they were still alive or where they were. So many families had been scattered by the war. "I don't know," Lee finally answered Choi. "But we have to try. This is all we have left." As the sun got higher, Lee could see more enemy movement on the hills. The North Koreans were getting ready for another attack. They always attacked at dawn when the light was still dim and it was hard to see clearly. Lee crawled back to where his men were waiting in their foxholes. There were only 32 of them left from a company that had started with over 100 soldiers. They looked tired and scared, but they were still ready to fight. "Listen," Lee told them. "The Americans are here to help us, but this is still our country, and we are the ones who have to defend it. The enemy thinks we will run away like we did in Seoul, but we are not running anymore. This is where we make our stand." The soldiers nodded. Some of them checked their rifles. Others said quiet prayers. A few of them looked at photographs of their families that they kept in their pockets. Private Park Jin-ho, who was only 18, raised his hand. "Sir, what if we all die here?" Lee looked at the young soldier. Park reminded him of Kim Dae-soo, the same young face, the same worried eyes. "Then we die fighting for Korea," Lee said. "That is better than living under the enemy." Just then, they heard the sound they had been waiting for, the whistle of artillery shells coming toward them. The North Korean attack was beginning. "Get down!" Lee shouted. The shells exploded all around them, throwing dirt and rocks high into the air. The ground shook like an earthquake. Lee pressed his face into the dirt and waited for the shelling to stop. When it was quiet again, Lee looked up and saw hundreds of North Korean soldiers running down the hills toward their position. They were shouting and firing their guns as they ran. "Here they come," Lee called to his men. "Remember, make every shot count." The battle began. Lee's men fired their rifles as fast as they could load them. The American guns behind them started shooting too, their shells exploding among the attacking soldiers. But still the North Koreans kept coming. Lee shot at a soldier who was running toward his foxhole. The man fell, but 2 more took his place. Lee shot again and again, but there were so many of them. This was it, Lee thought. This was where they would either save Korea or die trying. Captain Park Ji-ho held tight to his rifle as the landing boat moved through the dark water toward the shore. It was still early morning, and fog covered the sea around Incheon port. He could hear the sound of the boat's engine and the quiet voices of the Marines around him. Everyone was nervous, But they were also excited. After months of running away and losing battles, they were finally going to attack. The boat hit the concrete wall of the port with a loud bump. Park felt his stomach jump as the front of the boat opened up. "Go, go, go!" shouted the American sailor at the back of the boat. Park jumped into the cold water and ran toward the shore. The water was up to his waist and it was hard to move fast. Around him, other Korean Marines were splashing through the water, carrying their guns high to keep them dry. American soldiers were running beside them, all heading for the same place, the enemy shore. But something was wrong. Park had expected to hear gunfire, explosions, shouts from enemy soldiers. Instead, it was almost quiet. Where were the North Korean defenders? Where were the machine guns and artillery that should have been shooting at them? Park reached the shore and threw himself down behind a pile of rocks, waiting for the enemy attack. But nothing happened. He looked around and saw other Marines doing the same thing, hiding and waiting for a battle that was not coming. "Captain," called Sergeant Kim Myung-ho as he ran up to Park's position. "There's almost nobody here. We've only seen a few enemy soldiers, and they ran away when they saw us coming." Park could hardly believe it. General MacArthur's plan had worked perfectly. The North Koreans had put most of their army far to the south, fighting the Americans and South Koreans at Pusan. They had not expected an attack here at Incheon, so they had left only a few soldiers to guard the port. Major Song-hyun was standing on the beach, talking into her radio and pointing toward the hills inland. She was one of the few women officers in the Korean Marines, and Park had great respect for her. She was smart and brave, and she never got confused even in the middle of battle. "All units, this is Major Song," her voice came over Park's radio. "The port is ours. We are moving inland towards Seoul. Stay together and watch for enemy soldiers who might be hiding in the villages." Park gathered his men and started walking inland. The land around Incheon was flat, with rice fields and small villages scattered across the countryside. But these rice fields looked different from the ones Park remembered from his childhood. The water in the paddies was dirty, and there were holes in the ground where artillery shells had exploded. Some of the rice plants were burned blacks. They walked through the first village. Park saw that most of the houses were empty. Doors hung open and personal belongings were scattered in the streets. The people had run away when the fighting started months ago. But not everyone had left. In one small farmhouse at the edge of the village, Park heard a noise. He signaled to his men to be careful, and they surrounded the house. Park kicked open the door, ready to fight if there were enemy soldiers inside. Instead, he found an old woman sitting at a low wooden table. She was very thin and her grey hair was messy. She looked up at Park with frightened eyes, but she did not try to run away. "Please don't hurt me," she said in a weak voice. "I'm just an old woman. I have nothing you want." Park lowered his rifle and smiled at her. "We're not going to hurt you, grandmother. We're Korean soldiers. We're here to help." The old woman's eyes filled with tears. "Korean soldiers? South Korean soldiers?" "Yes, grandmother. We're taking back our country." The woman began to cry harder. She stood up slowly and went to a small kitchen area. She came back with bowls of rice. Not much rice, but she gave them what she had. Her hands were shaking as she handed the bowls to Park and his men. "My name is Mrs. Yoon Soonbok," she said. "I have been waiting here for months. I could not leave because I was waiting for my sons to come home." Park took the bowl of rice gratefully. He was very hungry and the rice tasted wonderful. "Where are your sons?" he asked gently. "They were soldiers," Mrs. Yoon said. "They went to fight when the war started. I have not heard from them since. The North Koreans took Seoul. I don't know if they are alive or dead." She looked at Park with hope in her old eyes. "You are going to Seoul? You are going to fight the North Koreans there?" "Yes, grandmother. We are going to take back Seoul." Mrs. Yoon grabbed Park's hand with both of her hands. "Please," she whispered, "if you find my sons, bring them home to me. Their names are Yoon, Chang-ho and Yoon Minwoo. They are good boys. Please bring them home." Park nodded, though he knew it would be almost impossible to find 2 soldiers among all the chaos of war. But he could see the hope in the old woman's eyes, and he did not want to take that hope away from her. "We will try, grandmother. We will try to bring all of our boys home." Staff Sergeant Kim Jin-ho could not feel his fingers anymore. He had been holding his rifle for so long in the freezing cold that his hands had gone numb. The wind was blowing hard across the frozen lake, and snow was falling so thick he could barely see 10 feet in front of him. He had never been so cold in his entire life. It was 20 degrees below zero, colder than Kim had ever imagined possible. His breath came out in white clouds that froze instantly in the air. Ice formed on his eyebrows and around his mouth. Even his spit froze before it hit the ground. Kim looked through the falling snow toward the mountains that surrounded the reservoir. Just yesterday, those mountains had seemed empty and peaceful, but now they were full of Chinese soldiers, thousands, and thousands of them, more than Kim had ever seen in one place. The Chinese had been hiding in the mountains for weeks, waiting for the right moment to attack. The American and South Korean forces had walked right into a trap. Now the Chinese were everywhere, coming down from the hills like a great wave, blowing bugles and shouting battle cries that echoed across the frozen valley. "Sergeant Kim!" called Lieutenant Colonel Hong Subin as she ran through the snow toward his position. She was one of the highest-ranking Korean officers in their mixed unit of Korean and American soldiers. Her face was red from the cold, and ice hung from her hair, but her voice was still strong and clear. "We have to move the wounded," she said. "The Chinese are getting too close. We cannot hold this position much longer." Kim nodded and looked around at the men in his unit. Many of them were hurt. Some had been shot in the fighting. Others, like Private Lee Young-ho, had frozen feet that were turning black from frostbite. Lee was sitting against a tree, and Kim could see that he was in great pain. "Lee," Kim called softly, "we have to go. Can you walk?" Lee looked up with tired eyes. He was only 20 years old, and he came from the warm city of Busan in the south. He had never seen snow before coming to this terrible place. "I don't think so, Sergeant. My feet, I can't feel them at all." Kim knelt down beside Lee and looked at his feet. They were white and hard, like blocks of ice. Kim knew that Lee would probably lose his toes, maybe even his whole feet, if they did not get him to a doctor soon. But the nearest hospital was many miles away, and the Chinese army was between them and safety. "Don't worry," Kim said. "I'll help you." Kim put Lee's arm around his shoulder and lifted him up. Lee was not very big, but carrying another person through the deep snow would be very difficult. Still, Kim could not leave him behind. No Korean soldier would be left for the Chinese to capture. As they started walking, Lee began talking about his girlfriend back in Busan. "Aunt Yoonji," he said through chattering teeth. "She has the most beautiful smile, Sergeant. She works in her father's shop, selling fish at the market. She promised to wait for me until the war is over." Kim listened but did not say anything. He knew something that Lee did not know. Busan had been evacuated weeks ago when the Chinese first entered the war. All the civilians had been moved to safe places or had fled to other countries. Yoonji was probably gone, but Kim could not tell Lee this. The young soldier needed hope to keep going. The snow was getting deeper, and Kim's legs were getting tired from carrying Lee. Behind them, he could hear the sound of gunfire getting closer. The Chinese soldiers were following them, and they were moving faster than the Americans and Koreans because they were not carrying wounded men. "How much farther?" Lee asked weakly. Lieutenant Colonel Hong appeared beside them, also helping to carry a wounded American soldier. "The trucks are about 2 miles ahead," she said. "If we can reach them, we can get out of here." But Kim wondered if they would make it. The Chinese seemed to be everywhere. Every few minutes they heard bugles blowing from different directions. The sound was strange and frightening, not like any music Kim had ever heard. It was the sound of an army that was very sure it was going to win. As they walked through the snow, Kim saw other soldiers from their unit. Some were carrying wounded friends. Others were dragging heavy equipment they did not want to leave for the enemy. Everyone was moving slowly, and everyone looked scared. A young American soldier walked beside Kim for a while. His name was Johnson, and he was from a place called Ohio. "How did so many Chinese get here without us knowing?" Johnson asked. Kim shook his head. "I don't know, but there are too many of them. We cannot fight them all." The wind grew stronger and the snow fell harder. Soon Kim could not see the mountains anymore. He could not see anything except the white snow and the dark shapes of other soldiers moving through it like ghosts. Lee was getting heavier, and Kim's arms were getting tired. But he kept walking, one step at a time toward the trucks that he hoped were still waiting for them somewhere ahead in the blowing snow. Colonel Park Sung-jae stood very straight and still as he watched the generals sign the papers that would end the war. It was a hot summer day at Panmunjom, and sweat ran down his back under his uniform, but he did not move. This was an important moment, the moment when the fighting would finally stop. For 3 years, Park had seen more death and destruction than any person should see in a lifetime. He had watched cities burn, seen good soldiers die, and helped carry wounded men to safety through freezing snow and burning heat. Now it was over, but Park did not feel happy. He felt tired and sad and empty inside. The papers said that Korea would be divided by a line almost exactly where it had been divided before the war started. All the fighting, all the dying, all the suffering, and in the end nothing had really changed. The country was still split in two and families were still separated. Master Sergeant Kim Yuna stood near Park, also watching the ceremony. She was one of the few soldiers who had fought at Pusan Perimeter and lived through the entire war. Her uniform had many medals on it, but her eyes looked old and tired. She was only 28, but the war had made her feel much older. Kim thought about all the friends she had lost during the 3 years of fighting. She remembered Sergeant Park Minji, who had been so brave and smart, always knowing what to do when things got dangerous. Minji had died trying to protect a group of refugees who were running away from the Chinese army. She had stayed behind to fight while the civilians escaped, and Kim never saw her again. She also thought about young Private Kim Dae-soo, who had been just 19 when he died near Daegu. He had always talked about going home to Seoul and opening a small shop like his father. But he never got to see Seoul again, never got to go home to his family. Kim had kept a small notebook during the war, and in it she had written down the names of every soldier from her unit who had died. The notebook was full now, page after page of names. Sometimes at night, when she could not sleep, she would read the names and remember their faces. The ceremony ended and the generals shook hands. Park and Kim walked back to their camp without talking. What was there to say? The war was over, but Korea was still broken. In the weeks after the armistice was signed, soldiers from both sides began going home. But home was not the same place. They had left 3 years ago. Many cities had been destroyed and rebuilt. Many families had been scattered or killed. The country that the soldiers returned to was different from the one they remembered. Kim got permission to go back to her village, near Daegu, where she had grown up. She rode in the back of a military truck for most of the way, then walked the last few miles on roads that were still damaged from the fighting. When she reached her village, Kim almost did not recognize it. Many of the houses had been destroyed and rebuilt with different materials. The school where she had learned to read was gone, replaced by a small medical clinic. The temple where her grandmother had prayed every morning was damaged, with holes in the roof where artillery shells had hit it. Kim walked slowly through the village, looking for her family's farm. She passed the place where her friend Sunmi's house used to be. Now there was just an empty field with some broken stones. She did not know what had happened to Sunmi or her family. Finally, Kim found her family's farm at the edge of the village. The house had been rebuilt, but it was smaller than before. The rice fields looked different too, newer with different patterns of small walls and water channels. As Kim walked up the path to the house, an old man came out of the front door. He was very thin and moved slowly, but Kim recognized him immediately. It was her father, Kim Young-soo. He was alive. "Yuna?" her father said, squinting at her in the afternoon sunlight. "Is that really you?" Kim ran to her father and hugged him tightly. He felt smaller and more fragile than she remembered, but he was warm and real and alive. For the first time in 3 years, Kim began to cry. "I thought you were dead," her father whispered. "I heard nothing from you for so long." "I'm here now," Kim said. "I'm home." Her father showed her around the rebuilt farm. He explained how Chinese soldiers had stayed in their house for 2 months during the war, and how he had hidden in the mountains until they left. He had come back to find everything destroyed, but slowly, with help from neighbors, he had built it all again. "The rice fields were full of holes from bombs," he said, "but we filled them in and planted new rice. The land remembers how to grow food, even after war." That evening, Kim and her father sat together and ate rice from bowls that her mother had made many years ago. Her mother was dead now, killed when Chinese artillery hit the village market. But somehow, her bowls had survived. As they ate, Kim's father talked about the future. "We will plant more rice next season," he said. "And maybe we can raise some chickens again." Kim nodded, but she was thinking about all the names in her notebook.